Episode 001, Yuppies and Harpoons. I'm Jacob Blunser, and here we got Joe, the lawyer and learning molar. How is that?
I've never even heard you refer to yourself as Jake. Is that a thing?
I don't call myself Jake at all. I've never done that before.
Yuppies and Harpoons.
Yuppies and Harpoons. Yeah, let's jump into some quick little bios. Why don't you go first, Joe?
All right. Okay. Hold on. We gotta break it up better than this. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Yuppies and Harpoons, and we have before us, we have before you two guys who really don't know what the hell they're doing. We both have full-time professions that take up all of our time, and so we've decided randomly one day that we're just gonna fill that non-existent void with something that's extremely taxing in time and extremely taxing in resources if you want to make it build. So why are we doing it? Jacob?
Why are we doing this? Yeah, I mean, I think we have nothing better to do than comment on culture, politics, economics, demographics. We don't have a lot of thoughts, so why not share the few we have? Good revolution right around the corner.
Yeah.
But where you at? Where you at in the stage of life, Joe?
So I am a first-year law student. I completed my first year in the spring of 2023, and I'm about to begin my second year of law school. And so hopes are that gets completed as fast as possible. So, yeah.
Nice. So,
what about you, Jacob?
Yeah, married 3 years now, and living in Lancaster, Pennsylvania as a commercial lender, so helping businesses with their financing needs, from small hobby shops to some decent-sized businesses here in the county. So, a lot of fun there, especially with interest rates and the current rate environment. But it's been a fun time for sure.
So, what would ever make you want to do a podcast?
You get to hang out and just hear yourself talk. I guess just
drink beer.
Why not
complain about the
drink
world?
Beer.
And so we're going to try and start a tradition, ladies and gentlemen. This is so I moved up to New Hampshire, and a local, I mean, you guys have all probably seen this before, but a local beer that's pretty close to where I'm at is Allagash. And so I love Allagash. I've always liked Allagash. They have great stouts. They have great IPAs. They have great, pretty much anything that Allagash makes, I like. Now, they're, I would say that they're like a step above your average beer. Like if you go to a brewery, you're going to see, not a brewery. If you go to just a typical like Buffalo Wild Wings, you'll see Bud Light.
It's definitely a niche.
Yeah. You'll see Budweiser, Yingling Lager. And this is essentially like, if you try to get into craft, this is like your first entry level beer, because nobody considers Bud Light real beer or Budweiser. Anything by Anheuser-Busch.
I feel bad because this is the glass I'm drinking out of. It
nice.
It's originally from Maryland, so we got a cool Maryland scene here.
I forgot that I'm the conservative on this podcast.
Pulled it out of the freezer, and I was like, here we go. But yeah.
Great. That's funny.
And I've got a Cape May Brewing Co.
Okay.
Wheat ale. So also New England. Making some good stuff up there.
Something interesting I found out about New England was so the best
beer
beer
New Jersey, not I don't know what I'm thinking. Cape May, New Jersey.
Yeah, you can't mix that up. Jeez. The one of the interesting things I learned about New England, though, is you hear about all the craft breweries. So, like, the number one craft brewery, I'm sorry, the number one state for craft breweries is Vermont. And then number two in terms of craft brewed beer per capita. And then number two is New Hampshire. And I think number three is Maine. So, like, you hear about New England, you're like, oh my God, like, wow, there's all these beers and like all this. You can go up there and you can find anything pretty much that you want, except, and this is what's interesting, except Trappist beer. When I was down in Pennsylvania, living, in Lancaster and whatnot, my favorite beer of all time was Chimay. I love the good old Chimay Belgian beer. It's made by like a Trappist monastery somewhere, I think somewhere in Belgium. And they've used like the same recipe for 800 years, which I've always loved because you find these beers that are like, Budweiser, we've, doing this for 200 years. And then you have the monks are like, yeah, we've been doing this for 800. And it's just, it's great.
They know their stuff over there too. Any place in Belgium, not to mention the monks, making some good stuff.
I'm actually curious. Let me see this. How long has Chimay beer been around? It's tough to spell. Okay. Oh, I don't know. The history. That looks like something that would take a decent amount of reading. The stuff I'm seeing here is 1850s. So maybe I think the monasteries have been making beer for 800 years, but the type of beer and the recipe used is only 150 years old. So, but anyway, point is that that's the best beer I've ever had. It's the Grand Reserve Belgian Chimay beer. It's just phenomenal.
That's the cream of the crop beer.
And you can't get it up here
because of all the local ones that monopolize it, kick out the Belgians.
You can't get it up here. It sucks.
That's sad. They should have a 5K in support of your cause.
I just think it's because they're anti-Catholic, but
So let's jump into some topics today then. So kind of out of the gate here, looking at campaign fundraising for 2024 presidential. So looking out, over a year, 15 months now. And plenty can change, but I feel like fundraising is always a good way to see where the momentum's really going. So yeah, we have, I guess, Joe Biden led the pack, where Joe Biden and Ron DeSantis actually kind of tied in Q2 fundraising, even though Ron DeSantis only had 6 weeks of fundraising during that time period. But Trump continues to pull in. He had about 15 million in Q2, so just behind 20 million for the other two. And then you got the long laundry list of other folks bringing in some money, but nothing significantly.
Is Donald Trump going to self-fund his campaign again, or is he just going to give his campaign a big loan and IOUs?
That's been the interesting part. He came into this with a pretty large war chest. But a lot of his donors continue to be small donors. So he's not self-funding like he did in 2016. He has that backing, with a lot of it coming from small donors, which probably helps with where you see the polling numbers. But he's about 50% right now in the GOP primary.
I've always found it interesting. Like you know this more than anybody. I am not a Trumper. But something that I've always respected about him is, not respected about him, but more like that I found interesting about his movement and his followers is that truly the most reviled man is the most blue collar grassroots candidate that the Republican Party has produced. Like I am a staunch, paleo conservative, Romney, Paul Ryan guy. I love that. I think that was the right motto for the party. But you have someone like, and they weren't liked by the media. People weren't like, oh my God, these guys are terrible. They were unfair, but just the vitriol that's been placed towards Trump has been interesting because you have a guy who really, yes, he comes from like an elite class, but his donor base is anything but that.
Yeah, very much the opposite.
It's interesting. It's
well, and how he ran in 2016, he was, pinching pennies. They talked about using folding tables as their office setups at headquarters and budget hotels. They didn't go to luxury hotels when they're on the road. I think this time's going to be interesting to see if he can keep up the small donor just with the legal challenges he's facing. It's really draining his cash with all these legal challenges he's facing. And that's where a lot of the scrutiny is going to be coming when you look at where his money is going. He's focused mainly on text messaging outreach, and then outside of that, a lot of his cash is just with legal challenges. So
I don't know what I think of the idea that he's using his campaign funds to pay for his legal fees. People have they've criticized that, and they're like, "Oh, that's dishonest." It's not like people thought they'd be funding his presidential campaign, and it's like, but I'm pretty sure, like, if you're giving money to Donald Trump and you don't realize how many lawsuits he has and how that's inhibiting his ability to run a campaign,
right.
You should know that. I don't think there's any Trump supporter who's giving him money who's like, what? He used that to pay for his attorneys? Well, that's illegal. That's just.
It's not like a nonprofit where you donate and have restricted funds and unrestricted funds. You just give it to him, and I don't know the campaign finance laws around it. But you give it to him, he's going to do what he needs to do to win, or thinks he needs to do.
Do you think he should be in prison?
In prison? I don't know.
I'm already halfway through this, and I'm sitting at 8%. So,
I think in prison, what does that benefit anyone? That's kind of partly how I look at it. By sending him to prison, who does that benefit? And are the crimes worth that? Comparable crimes, punishable in the same way? I just don't know.
I think it's a really interesting. What the hell? It's a podcast, right? This is what we're supposed to do. I hate to be just yet another show that's talking about the indictments, but I think that there's actually some issues. There's some points that I've thought of that not very many other podcasts that I listen to are making, and one of them is that the Clinton indictment. James Comey basically reinterpreted the statute to say that a person has to be more than willfully negligent, or grossly negligent, in order to be liable under the statute. And the problem is that we're already getting into legal jargon. And so gross negligence, okay, how many Americans know the difference between that and recklessness? These are different legal distinctions. Now, if we're going to say, okay, fine, let's take James Comey at face value. Was Hillary Clinton worse than did she supersede his standard of going beyond willful gross negligence? And my answer to that would be no. And I think that the question when it comes to Trump is, was he more than willfully negligent? Well, it's when you listen to more than willfully, grossly negligent. I think the answer is absolutely yes. The problem is that when you start making these legal rules, they're uninterpretable to the public. The public is not going to sit there with a fine scalpel and try to understand the differences between willful gross negligence.
That's where the media versus law often comes into play, of what the media and what normal human beings like myself, not like you, who actually understand a lot of legal jargon, like we can pick up like, oh, this is awful, but when it comes down to like what the law says, it might not hold up as well.
Right.
So,
well, basically, what people see, it's like an art display. It's like they see that Hillary Clinton is given a pass essentially, and the standard is raised, and then they see that Donald Trump comes along, does something a little bit worse. I mean, I think it was a little bit worse because he and this time, actually, like, yeah, well, if you don't apply the law in Donald Trump's case, like if we actually just remove the names and you say, okay, you have someone with the fact pattern of what Hillary Clinton did, which was essentially have somebody print off documents that were classified, that contained classified information.
You're comparing the Trump case where he was holding classified documents, because you're not comparing the other two indictments.
Right. I mean, the other two I don't find nearly as interesting. I think the classified documents, they have them dead to rights, because you in Clinton's situation, there's a strong argument that it's like, okay, I have classified documents on my server, and I ask somebody who doesn't have security clearance to print them off. It's like, yeah, that's not great. That's grossly negligent. Like, that's pathetic. You should do better. In Trump's case, it's like, hey, I'm showing you on tape this classified document, and I know it's not I know it's classified, and I know I could have declassified, but hey, I didn't declassify it as president.
Well,
here it is, and you can't put it in your book because it's classified. Like, that's not just grossly negligent. That's just like flagrantly against. If that doesn't break the law, then there's no law at that point.
Right. Well, it's like the Jay Leno, like, stupid criminal. Like, if you're gonna break the law, don't do it on camera in front of a room full of witnesses.
Yeah.
So you nail him just because he was being so foolish. But I mean, because what Hillary did and what Trump did, similar feel from what I understand. But then, Trump definitely provokes a little bit more and pushes buttons rather than cooperate. So I think that's where the pressure's coming from. So,
well, I think it's interesting how, going back to your campaign finance thing, this is my ADD taking you all over the place, but to the campaign finance thing, is that, DeSantis was clearing the field. The problem is that a lot of his donors, I think, have already maxed out their contributions.
Right.
And so the question about the upcoming quarter is going to be, how many new donors can he generate? And I can tell you this: I've been to a DeSantis rally, and I've been to a Ramaswamy rally.
Okay.
And I do not like. Ramaswamy is an interesting guy.
Let's not dive too deep into that one yet.
Yeah, when we talk about campaign finance, I actually have some interesting stats on him that he shared during his campaign.
About his campaign?
He's had 70,000 campaign contributions.
Yeah.
And 40% of them are first-time contributors.
Wow.
They were formerly GOP unaffiliated.
Okay. Yeah, so he brought in 7.7 million Q2. 5 million was his personal cash. So 2.7 then probably coming from that 70,000. And that's really where his strength is coming from.
What's his net worth?
That and JFK Jr., I feel like they're probably both, Robert Kennedy Jr., they're probably both tapping into a similar base. Kennedy's obviously a Democrat. But, Republicans have kind of adopted him in certain ways. And so he pulled in 6 million in Q2. The interesting part, the last 3 days, he brought in 3 million, 1 million per day. So as the quarter was ending, he ramped up some donations. So that's going to be really interesting to see how he does in Q3, especially with the
I'll tell you
momentum he's
what,
been building.
it was really interesting watching him interact with the crowd because
Are you talking
basically
about
Ramaswamy, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was watching him and I'm like, look, I don't. The environment he's in is tough because he has Trump sitting at 40% or whatever. But if you're going to beat Trump, you're going to have to peel off his support somehow, some way. And he basically made the argument that he's going to go after the bureaucratic state. Like he would be asked questions, by people in the audience, like, "Are you going to go after the people who persecuted Donald Trump?" And his answer essentially was like, "Yes, and I'm going to do it more effectively than Donald Trump." And it's
which is the begging question: how is Trump going to win? Because he lost, and he's using the same game plan, right? So that's an interesting angle to coming at, saying I can do this better than he can. I can drain the swamp twice as fast.
Yeah, because Trump on policy, that's the thing. It's like Trump on policy is actually just a Bush. And that's the thing nobody wants to acknowledge. It's that, I guess he doesn't have as much, foreign policy intervention, but he's an establishment Republican when it comes to policy. I mean, he will sign any, in fact, I would say he's like probably center right. If he's convinced that there's legislation that's good that isn't in touch with the Republican Party, he won't hesitate to sign it. The problem is that he just doesn't really have respect for democratic norms. And so, I mean, that's a mild problem.
Yeah, he's not a conservative in the way he governs, for sure. His justices, even, yes, conservative leaning, but are not Anthony Scalia conservative.
I think Gorsuch is. I mean, Gorsuch is a hardliner.
Yeah, the most, but is not as hardline as some of the others would be, even, and has jumped.
Well, Gorsuch is interesting because if you take textualism to its furthest extent, like like Gorsuch did this during the there's an interesting case called the Bostock case where he got all this flack, and I disagreed with his reasoning. Actually, I would have sided with the minority, but I had to do a research paper on this for law school, and the topic was sex discrimination. Does the Civil Rights Act prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation? So the law is that you can't discriminate on the basis of sex. Okay. And it's like, okay, so I'm a man, someone's a woman. If I don't hire them because they're, they have two X chromosomes, that's sex discrimination. That's covered by the Civil Rights Act. It's like, okay, all right. Well, what Gorsuch does is he says, if you hire somebody, or so I own a business and somebody comes in and they say, hey, I don't know how this will come up, but it's like, I'm gay. I think I'd be a great CFO for you. And I go, you know what? Because you're gay, I'm not going to hire you. The argument is that the reason I didn't hire him is because of sexual orientation. What Gorsuch says is like, even though this may not have been considered by the original drafters, true textualism is what the law explicitly states. And the fact of the matter is that if I don't hire him, because he wouldn't be dating, because he's not dating someone of the opposite sex, that's inherently about sex itself. So, in other words, that may sound complicated, but what it means is that if the guy comes in and says, I'm gay, and that tells me, okay, so he is dating or he's married to another man, my reason for not hiring him ultimately comes down to the fact that he is not married to or dating someone who is a woman. And that inherently has to do with sex. And it's like textualism, that's a pretty interesting argument, And so I like Neil Gorsuch. I think what he's been able to do it, and he's also done a lot of things with like the Oklahoma cases that awarding Native American tribes land that was guaranteed to them in treaties written in the 1800s. I think he's actually done a service to originalism and textualism because he's shown how that sort of reasoning can be used to produce different results that aren't always in line with the Republican Party, which is a huge critique. If you read like academic legal critiques of originalism, they're all about, well, why does this always coincide with like the Republican Party's agenda? And I think that's actually a valid critique of Scalia himself. And Gorsuch, I feel like, is much more ideologically pure when it comes to his approach on those issues. So that's a long tangent.
I mean, it should be really. Whatnot. But where were we with that, Ben? Do you have any thoughts about Robert Kennedy Jr.? Do you have any thoughts about Robert Kennedy Jr.? We've been keeping tabs on where he's been.
So, I mean, he's kind of like, I think he's overblown. So people have taken Biden's weakness and they've allocated it, and I would believe overinflated Robert Kennedy's popularity.
If you look at real, think he's just doing well because Biden is.
I don't think he's doing well.
He's double-digit polling, 15%, 12 to 15% polling. I mean, that's not bad for running against the incumbent. Uphill battle there. He has the name recognition, obviously, but do you think he's doing well only because, and he's getting this momentum only because Biden's doing so poorly?
So, okay, here's what I would say. So, I honestly believe that Kennedy's popularity, people are making a bigger deal out of his popularity than what the actual data says. So if you look at, they polled in a bunch of different states. So the last poll that came out, the last national poll that came out, had Biden at 64, Kennedy at 13, and Marianne Williamson at 10. Yeah. And and then they have a bunch of more recent state polls where Kennedy was at 10 and 11.
He has a big swing, and I think it really goes down to the polling base because it's so far out at this point. He's kind of that 10 to 15 range.
So, okay, this is the data I wanted. So the average of all these polls, and these polls range between as of July 23rd and July 5th. Biden is at 63.3, and Kennedy is at 13.6.
Like he's not taking, elections tomorrow, Biden wins, but
he's about 3 times momentum. As popular as Bill Weld, who primaried Trump.
But no, I mean, I'm just talking about there is momentum there. He's polling better than Ramaswamy is with the Republicans. Ramaswamy. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what I think. I think that Biden is incredibly weak, and a discussion about that is actually very interesting.
Yeah,
I think what's happened is that people say, "Oh my God, like Biden is the incumbent, and he's at 63%. What the hell? What's wrong? What's going on here? How is the incumbent at 63%?" And then they assume they're like, "Well, oh my God, Robert Kennedy's at 13.6. Like, what? You add those two together, you're at 76%. Like, okay, you still have a quarter of Democrats who are interested in someone else, and Marianne Williamson doesn't fill the gap.
Right,
she's at 6. So you have about 1 in 5 Democrats who aren't interested in Biden, who aren't interested in Kennedy, and who aren't interested in Williamson. That's what I think is because the biggest group that's anti-Biden isn't for Kennedy or Williamson.
Right.
Okay, the biggest group of people who aren't voting for Joe Biden don't have a candidate.
Yeah, they're either probably Bernie Sanders or AOC or more moderate.
Yeah. Or are there people who are moderate who just? I mean, Joe Biden's actually been a very moderate president.
I would highly disagree with that.
You don't agree with that?
Yeah. We'll get into that some other time, but.
So, do you think that that's
we should do like a year in review, and we can go over the scorecard maybe. You just look at spending. Really, that's the major thing there. But Republicans are spent too, but you look at Trump. Yeah, he spent way more than Obama did, but some of the spending and where it went. But
then the problem with that is if Republicans begin spending more, then the tolerance for spending, like a centrist when it comes to spend, is a centrist when it comes to spending supposed to be somewhere between Republicans and Democrats? Because if you look at the radical left and the spending proposals that they have, Joe Biden isn't anywhere near where they were. I mean, yes, he passed the Inflation Reduction Act that spent $700 billion over 10 years or something, and the original proposal was $4 trillion. Yes, he passed the stimulus bill. That was not everything the Democrats wanted. That was not everything that the Joe Manchin did not sign on to.
Well, right. I mean, without Joe Manchin, one person removed and they get everything they want. What he proposed is not what is signed into law, but he got pretty close to what he wanted.
Well, I think so. That it's interesting
without holding up his deal with Manchin in West Virginia as well.
So I was talking to, for those of people who don't know, which is virtually everyone, I was an intern with Governor Sununu. He's the governor in New Hampshire. He's a Republican governor, and something interesting we were able to have a lunch with him as the interns, and I asked him a question about the Republican governor in Vermont, and what I was like, what do you think of Governor Phil Scott? And Governor Sununu, he just kind of sits back and goes, he's just like, oh, I like Phil. I really like Phil, and he's like, but Phil's in a tough spot because basically he has super majorities in both houses that are Democrat, and so they can literally pass anything. But what's happened in Vermont is that the Democrat Party realizes that they can use Phil Scott as a veto on things that their really radical base want, and they can pass it and then secretly hope that Phil Scott vetoes it, and then they won't challenge the veto.
Right.
And so basically the benefit of having a Republican as the governor in Vermont is that the most radical left things that could happen, even though there's room for them to be overridden, there's a quiet majority of sanity that's in the state legislature that says, let's not actually let's pass it, and then he'll veto it, and then we can go back and say, sorry, it didn't pass. What I think Joe Biden has done is he's kind of acted like those Democrat legislatures. He's been like, well, you know what? We have. I'm the most progressive. I'm the most progressive president since FDR. I'm going to throw in $8 trillion of spending, or however the hell much I want to spend. And oh my God, who knew the guy from West Virginia, that hick? Yeah, he voted it down. I tell you, it's like.
I mean, I don't think it's completely the same comparison there as well, because I mean, he still is getting things through just in more creative ways than the blanket check they were originally writing. But one thing to kind of keep moving on here too, I want to mention on campaign finance before jumping is, unrelated, is DeSantis. He got a new campaign manager today. I don't know if you saw headlines on that.
I didn't know.
So this is his third major reshuffle, third campaign manager, and it's his former chief of staff. So hopefully there's some good chemistry between the two there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this kind of comes. The last one wasn't there very long, but they tried shifting some of the focus on the campaign and didn't really pay off, I guess, enough. And now they're reshuffling again to keep going. So that could be an interesting thing because he's kind of having, like you said, tapped out a lot of the donors already there, kind of needs momentum, kind of as the best challenger to Trump, at least in the GOP side.
Yeah. So DeSantis is interesting. Do you want to get into campaign finance, or do you want to talk about the candidates?
Do you want to dive too much into the candidates, or do you want to talk about unions at all, or?
Well, you can talk about unions. I know you're a real big fan of Josh Shapiro.
We'll leave us some. I guess the tip of the iceberg here was Yellow Trucking filed for bankruptcy last week. So this was a 99-year-old trucking company with 30,000 employees. And two of the main reasons they mentioned for bankruptcy was debt and just a lot of mergers that kind of went sideways. They've never really recovered since 2008 financial crisis. And another one was union pressures. So in June, they had a new contract proposal, and the Teamsters, which represent 22,000 employees, they rejected that contract. It's coming due here in 2024. So that just further exacerbated issues, really, that they weren't able to recover from. Yellow lost a lot of contracts when the union rejected their contract. And the reason stated for the rejection really was the Teamsters have had enough concessions in the past. It's their time to not cave. The flip side of that is now you have 30,000 people without a job. Now, obviously, the Teamsters are working for their 22,000 employees to get jobs back. There's going to be some kind of overlap there. But you still got 8,000 employees gone, not to mention a company worth, sizable company was valued a few $1 billion not too long ago, and now it's going under. I think the real headline to this story is Sean O'Brien, who took over the Teamster last year. So he's a third generation Teamster. His father and his grandfather both were part of the union. So he took over and he's really taking like an aggressive approach, kind of like no nonsense. He kind of is like a Trump in a way, where he just speaks his mind, not polished, not really well put together, but kind of gets things done in his own way. So his next big negotiations is UPS. So that's 300,000 employees he's negotiating on. UPS already has one of the highest average pay for employees at $49 an hour, but still pushing for more, and kind of unclear as to what exactly they want. Because if it's going to cripple the business, well, the business is going to make choices, whether it's bankruptcy to resolve this or who knows what.
Sure.
So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how some of these. There's a lot of momentum with unions right now. It seems Starbucks unionizing last year, and Amazon.
What's your view on unions? What do you think about the concept?
Concept makes sense. How they play out does not, and especially in fields of work where health is not as much of a concern. For example, like Starbucks. Yes, you're interacting with customers, and during COVID, that's definitely a major health concern. But outside of that, what do you need a union for? You're just going to pay dues, and just that's going to be deducted from how much you make. It's not like you're going to get more. Similar to like grocery store cashiers. Why are you getting a union to represent you. You can get market rate. If not, go find another grocery store to work at that pays more. So I think oftentimes it just becomes more of a political pact, if you will. And I think with the current momentum, it's a way to recruit people who feel unheard and lost, and it makes them feel like they're a part of something, when in reality, I don't think it benefits them in the way they think it will. For example, Starbucks closed their stores that unionized 8 months later after they did that. So now all those people are out of a job.
I mean, it seems like there's this constant, or when it comes to unions, people ask you blanket questions like I just did. Do you support unions? And it's like asking me if I support a certain type of business structure. Like,
it depends.
I mean, you give me the circumstance, give me the income streams, give me the sector of the economy you're talking about. I mean,
right.
It's so contingent, and like if you're in a highly competitive, like something I was thinking of is if there was like a fast food chain that was paying their employees like $7.25 an hour. Do you need to organize a union?
Right.
Like, no. Go work at another one. That pays you twice. That's stupid. I think the only reason unions become necessary. Actually, no. I shouldn't use the word only. That's a bad word. But I would say a big reason unions become necessary is when there's kind of this oligopolical. That's a huge word, but monopoly. People are familiar with the term monopoly, but like if there's this oligopoly of like all these big companies are kind of like secretly working together to keep like labor wages low. Like, okay, all right, fair enough. I agree. And so, you look at places overseas, for instance, that make like where Nike outsources its manufacturing to create its clothes. It's like, should those people be unionized? Abso-fucking-lutely. Like, yes, they should be. Like, that's not even like, of course, because you know what? They're going to get the same pay if they go and make clothes for Under Armour. They're going to make the same pay if they go make it for Versace. Like, it's going to be the same amount of money.
But so were you saying overseas folks should get union? Sorry.
What I'm saying is that where people are being exploited by not just one business, but they don't have any alternative, exit to take to get a fair wage for what they're doing. That's when unions become very, very necessary.
Right.
And so, but today it's like, is Sheetz paying people, or Sheetz is a main gas company on the East Coast? But is something like well, I guess all gas companies are regional, but like our gas companies. If you work at a gas company, like, is that no one's going to get away with paying like $8 an hour if the next gas station down the road is paying $17 an hour, which is what I see all the time. And so, like, you don't need a union, or if you do need a union, then you're just stupid. You like just pay attention to the advertising signs when you drive.
Well, and I think that's where the whole Starbucks unionizing is so bizarre to me, because Starbucks is considered like one of the best employers for that fast food, quick service restaurant. You can get, free college, healthcare, you name it with the benefits, not to mention a pretty good hourly pay. And they were saying it's not enough.
What do they pay?
I'm not sure, but I mean, it's not minimum wage, and it's usually above, a little bit above where things are at. But on top of that, they have a lot of good benefits here. Let's see where. And that's going to be skewed. Based off like location.
It's hard for me to talk about like a specific company, but like I see an article here. It's like the average Starbucks hourly pay ranges from approximately $10 for a crew member to 20 hours per hour for shift manager. It's like if you're getting paid $10 an hour, you're an idiot.
When was that written?
It's on Indeed.
Yeah, because I mean, $10 an hour 2 years ago, or depending on
a barista averages $14.75. Like,
right?
And
I mean, you take in parts of the country where cost of living is low versus California. $14 probably comes out. People in San Francisco are probably getting closer to $25 an hour, or whatever it is.
I hate this idea that you need to be paid a living wage. I think that's one of the dumbest ideas out there.
Well, and at this point, we have the living wage. Isn't it $15 an hour? And I mean, in most states, can you find a job? I mean, that pays less than that. It'd be difficult. I mean, so it's kind of what is that amount, living wage? And why don't we have minimum wage tied to inflation? So if it,
all this does, and you can just read like free market economics. Free market economists on this. I mean, all you do is if you have somebody, you're making it harder for people with low skill sets to get jobs. That's all you're doing when you raise the minimum wage. And so when you have people who, and the same thing happens if you unionize, and so the question is, and I think this is where unions get very, very problematic, is if you have a situation where the labor is not being adequately compensated, then yes, like, sure, like you should have a union. But the problem is that when are people ever going to say labor is being fairly compensated?
Never.
They're never going to say that, right?
Like, I'm never going to go to my boss and say, "Hey, boss, I'm good.
Just don't give me, don't give me any more money." Right? Don't give me.
I know budgeting season's coming up.
I don't know anybody else who's getting paid quite like me. Like, we all have friends who get paid more than us, and
well, that's kind of my question. That goes back to Sean O'Brien with the Teamsters and UPS. What more do they want, and to what point do the union benefit impact the company long term, where none of this is viable, which is what happened in part with Yellow. It wasn't just the union, but that they did play a part in the troubles the company had.
Well, it kind of reminds me of like it's like the advent of social media, I feel like, has given unions another lifeline, because you get to see the worst case scenario in the middle of nowhere, right? Like a place that's totally unrelated to you. Kind of like what you see, frankly, bring up another subject, like with police shootings. It's like you see somebody get shot, and it's awful. It's terrible. It's an abuse of power. It's everything about it's condemnable.
I just feel like that was an unexpected thing.
Yeah, but I mean, you see that, and you're like, that's awful. And then you start attributing that to local law enforcement. It's like, no, but we're not equipped. Like, we didn't evolve this way. We didn't evolve to think this way. We evolved to think, okay, our everyday experiences will influence the way that we see our everyday world. And those two things used to be the same, where our everyday world was what we saw when we went out. But now our everyday world is intricately connected with the web. And the web is not our everyday world. It's not what we personally encounter. And so you see awful things happen. Like, if you sit around at your computer and you just think of, and you watch clips on like bad relationships, like abusive boyfriends, you're gonna begin, if you just watch that every day about like how they were a happy relationship, and then all of a sudden the dude's just starting like throwing up against the wall. You're going to start thinking to yourself, oh my God, if you're a woman, you're like, oh my God, if I get into a relationship with a guy and it's going well, like, this might start happening to me, Whereas if you just ask your friends how their relationships are going, you might find out like domestic abuse is actually a lot less common than you'd think based on what you constantly see for yourself.
Because what you're saying is that if you saturate yourself with it, you'll end up believing that it's probably more widespread,
right?
Than
not.
And
this happened. And
some people are making the case with this with kids playing outside as well. In the 80s and 90s, there's a kind of increased reporting on kidnapping and similar declines with children playing outside. Kind of the idea being parents believe that kidnapping was more likely, even though it hadn't really gone up or down. I think if anything, it went down in the 90s.
They did this with COVID.
Parents stopped letting the kids play outside.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was with COVID. I'm trying to remember the numbers, but there was something like they polled. Believe me, Republicans do the exact same thing. So anyone, we do the exact same thing with things. But like they polled Democrats, like, what are your chances of dying if you go to the hospital and you have COVID? And something was something like 50%. It was some astronomically high number, and the only explanation for it is that people constantly read the worst case scenario becoming true. And it's like, well, no, like if you didn't have the media and you just talked to the people that you knew, you'd find out that, you probably knew maybe 5 or 10 people that went to the hospital. And for most people, maybe all 5 of them came back. And then for maybe 25% of people, I'm just making up numbers, but like, 1 in 5 died.
The concept, it's like mortality rate.
You're not going to meet a whole lot of people who really. Yeah. And so, my personal experience is that I think I knew about 10 people that went to the hospital and I think one of them died and they were like 90, 93 years old. It's like, and they all had, it's like, okay, like that's, but if I'm just watching clips of, or reading terrible stories about how so-and-so had a special condition that he didn't realize that he had. And, he went to the hospital and then he had to be put on a respirator. Before he knew it, he died. It's like, oh my God, if I see that every day,
you're going to believe it.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to unions, like I think
that's the marketing strategy there is every single day people get Facebook ads saying unionize. Then they go to Starbucks and they hate their job like everyone else, and suddenly they're like, well, I hate my job. I must want to unionize. It's like, well you probably just hate your job because no one likes to work.
I was talking about this with the governor, like at the lunch. I asked him, I was like, so he was bragging about how much he had cut taxes. And like, I think, Sununu, we currently have a huge surplus here in New Hampshire. I think of like $800 million budget surplus. And he came in and had like,
way to go.
The first budget was like $50 million. And so over 8 years, he's built up that surplus to like $800 million. It's a lot of money. And it's like, props, man. Like, great job. But then, and he's talking about how cutting taxes has increased business investment. It's like, okay, cool. Well, what happens? And I asked him this, I was like, what happens if you get a Republican, like the next Republican who's going to run, if they, for some reason, serve 8 years, they cut a bunch of taxes, and then the next Republican runs and they cut a bunch of taxes. Eventually, you're gonna have no taxes, or you're gonna have like an unsustainable, very low revenue. But like you can't even afford to paint the dome. Like,
But they only need that. They only need that for re-election to say they cut taxes.
They need it for re-election. So this is the problem. Is that you eventually have to get to a point where there's an election where the Republican doesn't run on cutting taxes because you don't need to. And so Governor Sununu told me, he was like, listen, we're at a spot where we probably don't need to cut anymore. I'm like, okay, like, is the next Republican actually going to run on that? Like, no, like they're not going to do that. They're going to go and like, we need to cut the business income tax. This is way too high. We're average among states, and New Hampshire prides itself on being a low tax state.
Parties on both ends cannibalize themselves of really trying to one up each other.
And so the whole problem is, and this is the problem with unions, is that the Republicans in this state need a Democrat to get into office and raise taxes so they can run on in the future. And unions need companies that are willing to basically pay their employees like terrible salaries or terrible hourly wages so that they have a purpose. And so they have an inherent interest, ultimately, in people being exploited. In order for them
I don't know if that's completely true, even, because, well, one, I think it's just natural checks and balances. Democrats and Republicans get elected back and forth because we hate each other equally. But I think with the unions, it's not that, like, it's almost shifting, it feels like right now, where it used to be the people, being oppressed needed a union, and the union would step in and there would be a solution.
Right.
It seems like it's far beyond that. And that's where I think some of the pushback on unions is at this point is now we have a decently, above average work environment. Maybe it's not the Harvard Business Review quality, but it's pretty close to it. And people are saying we need to unionize now. And that's, the whole Starbucks with the yellow trucking, had pretty good salaries and benefits and so forth. Yes, partly because of the union, but in Starbucks' case, it was just because the company wants to reward its employees, so they pay them well and give them good benefits. And workers still went out and unionized. And I think that's where the marketing and the war chest, basically, that these unions have to recruit is amazing. So,
well, who is that?
That's my neighbor.
Gotcha.
And the kids.
Well, one thing I think about is, I guess, to analogize my problem, or not really my problem, but just my precaution against unions. It's like, okay, let's say you're a gun rights enthusiast, right? You're a member of the NRA. You're a member of Gun Owners for America. You're like, you have the NRA credit card and all this. What I guarantee you barely any NRA members know is that the most landmark Supreme Court case that, affirming the right to keep and bear arms, it was Heller. Mm-hmm. And the decision was written by Justice Scalia, and he basically said that the government cannot ban a weapon that is in the common use of the public, right? Well, the problem that most NRA members would have no idea is that the NRA completely opposed that case going to the Supreme Court. They said that it was too risky for the Supreme Court to hear this case because you don't know how they're going to decide.
You don't?
And it's like, or it just completely does away with their purpose. It's like if the Supreme Court rules in your favor, now there's a smaller incentive for people to be NRA members. So ultimately, it's like if the Supreme Court came out the next day, today, and said, you have a constitutional right to not only tank and not only like fully automatic M16s, you have a constitutional right to bazookas, to tanks. It is set and done. You have rights to artillery. You can have anything you want. Like
as
the
long
NRA, right? Like Wayne LaPierre is going to be like, frick! Oh my God! Like I don't have a job, and so these unions, I think, are kind of in a similar space where they kind of want they don't ever want workers to get too comfortable with their situation. Kind of like politicians. They don't want their voting base to become too content with the situation because they won't come out and vote during the midterms.
Right.
You have to have someone who's going to oppose you. You have to have a nemesis. And your nemesis, not only do you need a nemesis, but you need to have a capable nemesis, and you need, or one that's at least capable in the minds of the people who support you. And so I believe that is one of the fundamental weaknesses to a union is that yes, they're great under certain circumstances, but when matters truly do get better, they can be awfully corrosive to our system. Like we have the weekend now. Like,
right.
No one's out there trying to get rid of people's rights to have the weekend, to have Christmas off,
And that's why, that's why we need to reimagine some of these things. Unions haven't really changed. The only reason they've changed is because the mafia now isn't as involved as it was with Jimmy Hoffa back when he was disappeared. But that's where it goes. But anyways, I feel like it might be time to wrap episode 1 up here of Yuppies and Harpoons. I feel like you're starting to go down the conspiracy angle of if anything gets good, it's got to end. And so I feel like that might be a good spot to end on the episode 1 here.
Yeah. So. Well, just so everyone knows, for anyone who might listen to this, so as like a forecast to the future, when we're really famous and people come back to listen to this to see if we said anything scandalous.
This thing will be bleached from the world.
Oh yeah, Media Matters will be watching this at some point in the future. I guarantee it. Yeah. So just so everyone knows, basically the idea is that Jacob and I are going to come up with topics of interest. And depending on the topic and depending on the interest, one of us might be leading the podcast, and the other person might be following, or we're just going to do random, pretty much AMAs between us, and just have casual conversations over a beer. So going forward, we don't really have a like precise, like, okay, we're going to be talking about this, and this. It's going to be much more, what do we find interesting? What sort of books are we reading? Something I certainly want to do is talk about big movies. And as soon as you get your ass over to watching Oppenheimer, we can finally talk about that. I'm going to need to go watch it again.
Wedding because weekend, so we'll probably push it. And then
who needs weddings?
Then I'll get out and see Barbenheimer. See, I need a good solid 6 hours to see.
I've become deaf. Yeah. It's a great movie. You got to watch it. Like the Hindu spirituality is phenomenal.
I've never expected you to say that. So, alrighty. Yeah, I'm signing off here. And episode 1.
All right.
Like, signing subscribe, off. Follow, signing off.
All right. Cool. We got to come up with a script to be able to end these podcasts, Jacob. This is not. You don't end the podcast with "we're signing off." That's like ending it with. It's like ending a book with the end. Like just. All right, guys. Thanks, and we will see you next Tuesday. All right, next Wednesday on Yuppies and Harpoons. And yes, Jacob is responsible for the harpoon.